Unfortunately, this project was all too easy for me. I feel as though I have been failed by the healthcare system, but perhaps it would be best to tell you my story and let you judge for yourselves. I feel it is important that I use my own story, even though my experience is all too common for women around the world. I think one of the reasons other countries laugh at the United States is because we teach our children from the beginning to be proud Americans under false pretenses. Therefore, growing up as a female in the United States, I felt lucky that I did not experience the so called sexism that others were forced to endure across the world. I was fed a series of lies about the supposed eradication of sexism in the United States, which created my false sense of equality. I first acknowledged inequality in the United States when navigating the daunting system for women's health care. My personal account of my diagnosis and treatment is meant to highlight a lack of awareness about women's health issues. The existence of a gender bias in medical research is to blame for the negligence of women in healthcare, which demonstrates inequality at an epistemological level in healthcare. Without further ado, here is my story. At the ripe age of 18, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the disease, it is characterized by the growth of endometrial tissue, which is meant to grow inside the uterus, outside the uterus. To put it simply, I literally internally bleed when I am menstruating, which, with my luck, is all the time. Thus, I am subjected to chronic pain with no hopes of an effective treatment or known cure. Perhaps what is most troublesome is the fact that every doctor remarks how young I am to have a diagnosis. To me, who has been suffering for 7 years, it seems absurd to me that I was still considered young to have a diagnosis. When I was 12 years old, I got my first period, which is where the horrors began. Instead of a normal menstrual cycle, I would bleed for 21 days with only 7 days off. My periods were not only persistent, but also terribly painful. I suffered gut wrenching cramps, mood swings, migraines, and more for 7 years. From the age of 12 to 18, I would go on to try 9 different kinds of birth control to manage my period, only one of which would succeed, and to see over a dozen doctors. Over the span of 7 years, I have never not been on hormonal birth control. In addition to the suffering caused by the disease itself, I suffered the grimacing side effects of hormonal changes. I do not think many understand the extent to which hormones regulate the body, or at least I did not. The side effects that I have experienced include insomnia, mood swings, weight gain, weight loss, nausea, acne, depression, anxiety, loss of appetite, liver problems, vision impairment, and more. And now I sound like one of those medical commercials. Anyways, over the years, no doctors had attempted to identify the root of my problems, but rather they were dismissive of my issues and threw me on birth control. The lack of a coherent plan of care for endometriosis demonstrates the negligence of women's health issues, especially when considering this disease may affect up to 1/3 of women and has such debilitating symptoms. This is why it was not until I went to the ER in December of 2020 and demanded for care that I even heard a doctor suggest endometriosis. However, within a month of this suggested diagnosis, I was already undergoing surgery to officially diagnose it. I finally felt justified after 7 years of suffering, which was a relief in and of itself. And thank God the diagnosis itself brought relief because I would go on to try every known treatment, desperate for relief, but finding none. To this day, I am in constant pain. I have a handful of doctors who I see several times a month. I have 3 current OBGYNs, a pain specialist, a pelvic floor physical therapist, and my pediatrician, among other specialists. I am on a multitude of medications, and I do have my medical marijuana card as well. But perhaps the most disheartening thing to see is the negligence of women in healthcare. From the very beginning, I felt outright ignored. I felt my issues were easily brushed aside and dismissed by several healthcare professionals. There is an undeniable stigma surrounding menstruation, not only in the public realm, but also in the healthcare system itself. As shown in my case, this stigma prolongs diagnosis. Furthermore, although an objection might be that endometriosis is difficult to detect, my reply is that not even the bare minimum has been done to address this difficulty. For example, women should receive more education and resources about their own bodies, and more comprehensive surveys surrounding women's healthcare and menstruation should be conducted. It's not until I saw my pediatrician this past April that I saw the full extent to which healthcare has failed women. It took to quote my pediatrician, losing an eating disorder amount of weight for her to realize my suffering. The appointment ended with my sobbing in the arms of my pediatrician, who was tearing up herself, both of us feeling hopeless, and her knowing that my condition had been severely neglected for years. Although I have accepted my hopelessness, those around me have not. By the eyes of doctors, I can tell they are troubled by my hopelessness. I have spent all of my teenage years wondering why it has to be this way. Why is life so unfair? As a child, I was sheltered from inequality. Thus, when I was confronted by this harsh reality, I did not know how to react. I have since launched an inquiry into the reasons why endometriosis has gone neglected for so long. There are several reasons for this, which all relate back to gender disparities in healthcare. Firstly, women's health is inherently surrounded by a stigma which deters effective discussion. Women in pain are easily dismissed by doctors and taught to believe that this pain is normal. Endometriosis falls into the category or abyss of a woman's disease, which are often overlooked because they are considered unimportant or taboo. Periods are made out to be much worse than they actually are supposed to be. It is for this reason that women consider excessive amounts of pain to be normal, when in reality they have endometriosis. Furthermore, a stigma prevents a coherent care plan for endometriosis across the medical community. The medical community has failed to come together and acknowledge gender disparities in healthcare. Kevel offers an amazing analysis of the issue in her paper, The Invisible Woman, Gender Bias in Medical Research. She identifies two major excuses for the exclusion of women in research offered by researchers themselves. One, menstruation complicates research and makes it more costly. And two, a woman test subject could become pregnant and research might harm the fetus. These excuses lack sufficient basis or reasoning and represent the embarrassing reality of a value-laden healthcare system. She also notes that women outnumber and outlive men and use health services more than men, despite medical research being done on mostly males. Furthermore, she coins that the prevalence of hysterectomies, the second most common surgery in the United States at the time of her writing this article, especially for minor reproductive problems, indicates that alternatives to the surgical procedure have been inadequately explored. Value-free ideal of science. Defenders of the scientific method argue for the sufficient elimination of social factors in the context of justification. Conversely, feminist epistemologists argue context of justification insufficiently accounts for contextual factors and ignores the context of discovery. Feminists believe social, political, moral, contextual, and non-cognitive factors may hinder scientific rationality due to the insufficiency of context of justification. Therefore, the question of whether medicine is gender biased depends on whether the scientific method sufficiently acknowledges contextual factors in its justification of knowledge and theory choice. I argue that if theory choice and justification of knowledge do not sufficiently account for contextual factors in the scientific method, then the scientific method is value-laden. If medical research relies on the scientific method, then medicine is an inherently value-laden science. Since sexist social and political influences do not see proper filtration in the scientific method, sexism acts as an auxiliary theory in science and consequently in medicine. My personal experience illuminates the bigger issue at hand, gender bias in healthcare. Gender bias in healthcare finds its roots in medical research but extends all the way to the physician-patient relationship. A change in our conduct of medical research is needed in order to eliminate sexist auxiliary theories from social contexts. Feminist methodology should be used as an example for the proper contextualization and justification of scientific research.